This section presents the history of the middle reach of the Russian River, which flows between Healdsburg at the mouth of Digger Bend down to the Wohler Bridge. Over time, the Russian River has changed from its original shape, which was wide and shallow, and has been converted by dredging into a deep, narrow, straight channel. It used to cover 3,200 acres of the valley bottom, and now just covers a little over 800. The river has changed dramatically, but it's changing back to what it was, and that has huge implications for people living on the valley floor. The Russian River in the middle reach flows from the canyon mouth of Digger Bend at Healdsburg down to the constriction at Wohler Bridge. Over this area, the river flows across a generally flat, open area of the valley floor, but at the downstream end at Wohler, it hits a constriction, and during large floods, this constriction causes a large backwater lake. This means that sediment coming into the reach at Digger Bend cannot get out the other end. Thus, sediment accumulates, which reduces flood capacity, flood protection, and causes erosion. These diagrams and actual air photos show the difference between the pre-disturbed Russian River and after land use effects. The upper picture shows a wide, meandering stream, shallow and wide, going across the entire valley floor. The lower picture, taken in 2007, is an actual aerial photograph, shows the narrow corridor of the river, about 800 acres versus the 3,200 above, with pits and bridges and agricultural land in former riverbed areas. In the late 1930s and 1940, large floods washed out a lot of agricultural land. It had been reported that part of the Russian River had migrated a mile across the valley floor in just 10 years. The landowners were frustrated, so they wanted a flood control project, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came up with a channelization and levee construction plan. The federal government couldn't pay for it. It was not affordable, but Basalt Rug Company offered to construct the project in exchange for the gravel, and began in 1940 from Healdsburg. Deep dredging of the Russian River increased its channel capacity. This photo was taken before the deep dredging occurred near Healdsburg during the 1940 flood. This flood, about the same size as the 1986 flood, spread over the entire valley floor, and the channel tended to move from side to side of the valley, and this would strip soils away from agricultural land, destroy vineyards, and turn it into unusable gravel bars. Historical accounts show up to 1 mile of river migration in 10 years across this part of the valley. Flood control and erosion control in the middle reach of the Russian River near Healdsburg was provided by dredging, which occurred between 1940 and 1970. The Basalt Rock Company took a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers design for a flood control and levee project and proceeded from Healdsburg downstream to the Wohler Bridge, about 6 miles, to dredge the river down 50 feet or more. This effectively removed all the vegetation, and it also deepened and straightened the channel. The dredging in the middle reach devastated the river environment. This picture shows a view upstream in the early 1960s, showing the new channel, which is the straight channel, and the big wide meander bends that were destroyed. You can also see in this picture large tracts of cottonwoods forest that has been torn down. This again reduced the river area from over 3,000 acres to about 800 acres and provided a deep, narrow channel for flood control. After this was done and the levee was constructed, bars were skimmed into the 1980s. The deep dredging in the middle reach was a huge success. As you can see in the upper picture, floods of the same magnitude flooded all over the place the valley floor in 1940, whereas in 1986 they were more isolated to the channel itself, which was deep, narrow, and clear of vegetation. Bar skimming through the 1980s helped preserve the channel and maintain it. And over time since then, the amount of gravel removed has decreased dramatically, gravel has filled it, and also we're losing flood capacity due to vegetation. The deep dredging reduced the area of the active floodplain from 3,200 acres to just a little over 800 acres. It had a great effect of reducing flooding. 1955, 64, and 86 floods were well contained. However, it required that bar skimming maintain it. If the bars were not skimmed, then gravel started to accumulate and vegetation started to grow. Unfortunately, very little has been done since 1990 to maintain the channel, and there have been significant changes as a result. Aerial photographs from 1961 show the effects of deep dredging. You can see deep channels, multiple channels, but you can also see these white gravel bars sticking up, which indicate that there was enough sediment supply to fill the dredged channel. Originally, the channel had been dredged 20 feet below low water, but in this picture, the bars are sticking up. After 1965, most of the gravel removal was done by bar skimming above low water. This helped to maintain flood capacity by reducing vegetation and keeping the bars low. It's important to distinguish the different eras of gravel mining in the Russian River. Dredging from 1940 to about 1965 deepened the river greatly and straightened it. These were huge amounts of volumes of gravel taken out versus what was coming in. But later on, enough sediment did come in to partially refill the channel, and at that time, gravel extraction and bar skimming kind of kept up with the amount of sediment coming in. It was in balance, and for a long time the channel was maintained. Ground photographs from the 1800s show a wide, shallow channel of the Russian River near Healdsburg. The upper left photograph, taken in 1872, shows a wide bar where the Sire plant exists today. In 1892, the diagram on the right shows gravel bars emerging from the channel and low floodplain benches alongside. The lower diagram, drawn in 1876, looks northward toward Fitch Mountain and shows the Russian River tributaries and the areas under land use that were subject to flooding about once every 10 years. The next set of slides show diagrams representing the Russian River during different eras. The first era, the historic era, occurred prior to 1850 and showed the original river before development. During this period of time, the channel was shallow, it had a wide active floodplain that flooded about once every 5 years, with devastating floods about once every 10 years on average. Land use and farming along the active floodplain was subject to flooding, damage, and destruction due to the channel meandering across the shallow floodplain. The next era started in 1940 with the dredging from Healdsburg down to Wohler Bridge. This took about 25 years to complete. During this time, the channel was lowered about 30 to 40 feet, but it subsequently refilled later. But you can see by the diagram how much deeper and narrower the channel was compared to the historic era. This deepened banks, deepened the channel, increased flood protection for the properties along the river. After deep dredging was done in 1965, the bar skimming era began. During this period, the river partially refilled itself from the dredging era, shown at the bottom, between that and the historic era shown at the top. Gravel bars were skimmed 1 foot above low water. The entire bar was removed. This helped to maintain the bars as low alternate bars and also controlled vegetation, which can further reduce flood capacity. During this time, floods were generally well controlled. After the bar skimming era, which ended in the late 1980s, the notch in-channel mining era began, and alternate bars began to build. They began to increase in height due to sediment deposition, as well as vegetation development, which encroached into the channel and further reduced channel capacity. Vegetation and sediment deposition kind of worked hand in hand, and soon much of the historic era channel was being recovered. This diagram shows the rates of gravel mining from 1946 to 2006. As you can see, the rates of mining were rather extreme up until about 1964. It peaked about 2 million tons per year during the early 60s. Later, after that, bar skimming only took out about 250,000 tons per year, as sources shifted from the channel to digging large pits in the floodplain. There was no continuous mining in the Middle Reach after 1989, and a little bit in 2000. From 1987 into the 2000s, the channel filled, and this area near the confluence of Dry Creek downstream from Healdsburg shows bars 8 and 9. Bar 8 has graded during this period more than 20 feet and includes dense vegetation. Bar 9 came up 14 to 16 feet, became a point bar, and started eroding the opposite bank. These changes drastically changed the behavior of the river. It had less flood capacity and less ability to transport sediment.